Hi class, welcome to Chapter 2, Ethics and Public Speaking. At the end of this chapter, you should know the following information: why ethics are vital for public speaking, discuss the guidelines for ethical speech making, define the differences between global patchwork and incremental plagiarism, and of course identify 3 ethical listening guidelines. So overall, this chapter focuses on what are the ethical standards expected of you as a speaker in terms of developing and presenting a speech. What are the differences between different types of plagiarism, which is, again, addressing this academic honesty. And then also, as the audience members, what are the ethical responsibilities of us as listeners? So what are ethics? Typically in class, I have students make a list of ethical behaviors that they feel a speaker should follow. So I invite you just to think to yourself, what are some things that make a speaker ethical, and what are some things that make a speaker unethical? And so when you have developed those thoughts, feel free to jot them down, or we can just continue in this presentation. So what are ethics? Essentially, this is a branch of philosophy that looks at what's right or wrong. And so I offer 3 basic definitions. So the one is by O'Hare and colleagues in 2012, and that definition reads: ethics is a study of moral conduct, how people should act towards one another. So we see that morality is a central aspect of ethics and how we should treat one another. Now, ethics is a branch of philosophy that deals with issues right or wrong in human affairs. Essentially, ethics answers that question: what actions are right or wrong in a particular circumstances? So we see that there's a trend of ethics called situational ethics, and that I think was developed by Immanuel Kant. And situational ethics essentially looks at how ethics change based on the circumstances or the context. So, for example, a lawyer, in some cases cannot disclose private information of their client. Or, think of a doctor, they cannot disclose patient information to whoever. Even as educators, I can't go around disclosing your personal information to just anyone. Like, I can only communicate like your grade, for example, only to you. So if a family member or a friend reaches out to me and says like, hey, I want to know what so-and-so got in their, public speaking course, like by law, I cannot share that information. So we see that the particular circumstances influence oftentimes the ethical behavior we engage in. And so understanding the situational context and how that influences ethics, we will look at public speaking and the ethical expectations placed upon you based on this solemn, sacred situation, addressing the public, using our rhetoric for influence. And so we'll continue looking at that. So here are some different types of ethics. We have meta-ethics. This is concerning theological meaning and reference of moral propositions and how their true values can be determined. So like on a grander scale, how is it that we know, maybe taking an innocent life is morally and ethically wrong? And so meta-ethics really dives into the theological aspect of ethics and how we can determine morality. We see normative ethics. This is concerning practical means of determining a moral course of action. This is typically based on this construction of reality, or the consensus of a group of people. So, maybe within a particular culture, it's unethical to, do this behavior. And so we see that normative ethics are applicable to, cultures, to societies, to, religious sects, and so forth. Applied ethics is essentially focused on what a person is obligated to do in a specific situation. So we aren't going to dive into the theological, the philosophical debates about ethics and, how is it that we become, ethical people through a normative societal process. We aren't even going to touch on that. Primarily, we're just going to focus on the applied aspect because some of these deliberations and debates have already taken place and they continue to take place. And so we are just interested in how does these ethics pertain to us as communicators, as public speakers. So ethical issues arise when we ask whether a course of action is moral or immoral, or what's fair or unfair, just, unjust, honest, dishonest, right or wrong. And so I'm just going to give you, again, the answers or the applied ethical standards for speech making. So in order to do that, we first have to look at speech making as a form of power. So speech making is a form of power and carries heavy ethical responsibilities. So if you look at the picture at the top right-hand corner, this was a picture that I took in 2000 and 16, when I traveled to Europe. And so I spent 2 weeks in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in the surrounding area. On the way back, we had a 6-hour layover in Berlin, Germany. And so I was like, I'm not going to sit in this airport for 6 hours. And so I jumped on a subway and I found myself at the Berlin Wall. And the wall that really separated, communist occupied Germany and free Germany. And so, this is just a real example of the ramifications of dangerous speech. And even though that we value freedom of speech, we as public speakers have to really check our motives and really be in the best interest of the audience and society. And so this Berlin Wall is a constant reminder that speech making comes with some serious ethical responsibility and potential ramifications for the type of rhetoric we engage in. And so we see these remnants of Hitler and the Nazi regime and just how that rhetoric was so dangerous, and it completely, destroyed and sparked genocide. So again, this is something that we need to take very seriously. So audience members must use ethical listening and critical thinking to evaluate claims and look for flaws in arguments. So, this becomes especially true when we are exposed to just so much information out there. It's hard to decipher what's accurate and what's inaccurate. And that is really the sole responsibility of the listener, is to engage in that critical thinking, the evaluation process, to examine all the evidence, is because you're going to have people trying to persuade you one way or the other throughout your life. And we see that now, like whether or not, face masks or vaccines are the cure, And so how do we sift through all of the information to find, credible, sound reason and logic that is going to help us make those decisions? And so speech making is a very serious topic, and I think it's really relevant in today's society. So briefly, I want to touch on Quintilian's thoughts on ethics. So he defined a rhetorician as a good person speaking well. So what does that mean? A good person speaking well? Well, essentially, a good person is someone who is of moral character, who is trustworthy, honest, conducts their personal life in a moral way. So that is a good person, someone who is striving for morality, living a good life, not in terms of just squandering or just indulgence, but is living a good, fruitful, meaningful, purposeful life. And then Quintilian, interesting enough, uses the speaking well as a component of ethical speech making. So it's not just good enough that we live, a moral life or a life that is based on virtue, but we are using that foundation to really enhance our public speaking. So, speaking well is, the practice, the skill development aspect. So speaking for good purposes. So if you read up on Quintilian, he would argue that, um, you know, an ethical speech maker is going to use their rhetoric and their skills to advocate for justice, fairness, and truth. And so those are the three things that really define ethical speech making. Are we using our rhetorical abilities for justice? Are we being fair in how we present our topics? Are we seeking truth? Are we presenting the truth? So these are some of the things that Quintilian would define as ethical speech making. So a speaker must be of high moral character. Speaker has knowledge of wide range of subjects. So it's not just a matter of being a good character, but it's also developing our intellectual and capacities and our wisdom and our knowledge about a particular topic, right? So, you can talk about anything. You can select a topic for, a speech, but really, in order to do that ethically, you have to do your homework. You have to research. You have to become knowledgeable on that topic before you share that information. A speaker must know the subject in depth. So what we see is this is how Quintilian would define an ethical speech-making process or an ethical speaker. So what are some of the ethical speech-making guidelines and standards that we will be operating in this semester and future speeches? Well, essentially, we first have to look at the goals of our speech. So ethical goals, right? We must be operating in the best interest of the audience, or they must be fully informed. So, we can't manipulate the audience to try giving us money, right? Unless if they are fully informed on why they're giving this money or why you're asking for donations, how the money is going to be spent, the various allocations of that money, and the good that's going to come from it. So they have to be completely informed on why it is that we are maybe asking for a donation. And we see this taking place all the time, charitable organizations asking for donations. They inform, your donation is going towards this cause. This is going to be specifically how this money is going to be allocated, and these are the benefits that are going to arise from your donation. Think of like the American Red Cross or other nonprofit organizations that help other countries or groups in crises. So it cannot include illegal, immoral, unethical elements. So within this class, don't try persuading us to go rob a bank. Or, a few semesters ago, one of my students wanted to give a speech on how to hotwire a car. And, again, that behavior is illegal. I would say it's immoral and unethical. So really think about the goals of your speech. We are learning some powerful tools, and the tools in of themselves are completely neutral. Just because you learn how to present a speech or use some of these tools to influence others doesn't make them right or wrong. It's how we apply the tools that really determine the ethical standard of that application. So we want to be, again, operating in the best interests of the audience, and we want to make sure that our topics are legal, moral, and ethical. Another ethical speech-making principle that or standard that we will be operating from is to be prepared. So in order to be prepared, we have to conduct adequate research, We have to be well organized, and we have to rehearse our delivery, right? So before our speech, we have to do all that hard work, right? Because we don't want to waste the time of our audience. So we want to be completely prepared and to respect our audience time, is because oftentimes they're there by free will to listen to us. Very rarely are we going to be speaking to an audience that is forced to be there, right? In some cases we do, such as, a class like this, or, within the workplace or organization. Sometimes people are paid to be there to listen to us. Be honest. So we see that most ethical systems condemn lying and dishonesty, and this includes plagiarism. So in the next few slides, we'll talk about plagiarism. And then be respectful. So treat others as you would want to be treated, avoid name calling and abusive language, and put these principles into practice. So it's kind of like Aristotle's golden mean of ethics, or that treat others as you want to be treated type of mentality. So none of us like to be called names. None of us like to be disrespected, and consequently, we should be approaching the audience or our topics or our speeches in a very sophisticated, formal way. So there is no room for disrespect in this class, or in public speaking at all. Again, this is a powerful, solemn opportunity to make a positive impact on your audience. So what is academic honesty, and what is dishonesty and plagiarism? Well, essentially, at the core, plagiarism is presenting language or ideas of another as one's own. So we see that on this graph over here, we have, the legal aspect, which is just taking or borrowing something that isn't yours or without permission. So, copying and pasting, an essay is legally, is illegal. So legally that's wrong. Plagiarism is where we don't say where we took it from. And so there's this kind of this middle ground where plagiarism is both illegal and immoral, is because we're taking maybe information and we aren't even citing it. We're saying that this is our own work. So there's different types of plagiarism. There's global, which is stealing from one source, which is essentially copying and pasting maybe a whole speech outline, or it's patchwork, using language or ideas from multiple sources to patch together maybe an argument or speech that sounds good, but is based on a lot of different parts taken from a lot of different sources. And then there's incremental, and this is failing to give credit to ideas or language used in a speech. And so if I were to develop a theory that is similar to someone else's theory and I just change some of the wording, like, that's incremental plagiarism. So plagiarism is taken very seriously within public speaking and also in academics. So this is something that you want to make sure that you're well informed on. And plagiarism could actually be constituted as maybe failing to reference where you got a quote. And so, we have to be diligent in our work to make sure we're citing everything and we're giving credit where credit is due. So let's move on to ethical listening. The audience has an ethical obligation. So the first one is must be courteous and attentive. So that is our first ethical obligation as an audience member. We have to be courteous to the speaker, even if the message doesn't resonate with us or is not something that we agree with. And we have to be attentive, right? And so we do have to be critical of what the speaker is telling us, is because they could be telling us a bunch of garbage, or maybe presenting ideas that are immoral or unethical. And so within our class, I really encourage the support of one another by actively listening to different ideas and perspectives. At the beginning of the semester, I mentioned that we all have personal experiences that we can share, so that others can learn from our experiences. The only way we can learn from other people's experiences is to be courteous and attentive to them. Avoid prejudging. Now, try to understand that, who the speaker is and their perspective taking. So using perspective taking, try to place yourself in the shoes of the speaker. Like, what is it they're trying to accomplish? And so, again, you don't need to agree with the speaker or their message, but try to avoid prejudging them until after the presentation, until you've gotten all the information from the speaker, and then you can arrive to some sort of judgment. Maintain free and open expression to new ideas. So within this class, we will be exposed to a variety of different topics, of different speeches, and even in academia, like we're exposed to a lot of different trends of thought. So remember that you can disagree with something, but support the speaker's right to express that, and then, under the right circumstances, then you can engage in that dialogue of really, challenging these ideas. And that essentially that's what academia is. So it's on a grander scale. So think of it like one huge debate. So someone writes this research paper, gets it published. A group of researchers over here were like, well, I disagree with this, this, and this. And so they conduct a study and publish their paper to challenge these individuals over here. And so it's just this constant one big debate on, discovering, knowledge. And so again, in order to do that, we do to a certain extent have to be free and open to new ideas and new trains of thought. And by virtue of that, we develop in cognitive complexity the ability to understand different viewpoints of a particular situation. So on a grander scale, we do have to recognize that free speech comes with a responsibility. So your speech and communication should promote public discourse. So is it constructive? Is it adding to the larger conversation that we're having as an academic discipline, or maybe the larger conversation associated with your topic? Does it advance constructive goals, right? And so, is it in the best interest of the audience? Is it trying to appeal to the greater good of trying to delineate or understand, this topic, right? Or is it just purely based on manipulation or self-serving interest, right? And so we do have to be mindful of, what type of goals, constructive goals, are going to be stimulated based off of our topic and speech. So, very brief chapter. We essentially went over what ethical speech making sounds like. Be fully prepared as a speaker, be honest, avoid name calling and abusive language, and use good public speaking principles. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.